The sun had not yet risen fully above the horizon, but already the savannah whispered with the heat to come. The land stretched out in all directions, cracked and bleached by drought where the grasses clung to life in shades of brittle gold and ash. Dust lingered in the air like memory, curling upward from every hoofbeat and gust of wind, softening the outlines of trees and blurring the hills in the distance. In the hushed early light, where shadows still pooled beneath thorny bushes and the calls of morning birds had not yet found their full voice, a faint movement broke the stillness, too small to notice from afar, yet unmistakable to those attuned to the quiet language of suffering. In a dry riverbed, no wider than a narrow footpath and choked with hardened clay, lay something that at first might have been mistaken for refuse, until a shiver moved through it, followed by a weak, trembling breath. It was a puppy. So small it looked unfinished, with bones sharp beneath its matted fur and eyes too large for its face. Its body was smeared with mud and clumps of dried dirt, the kind that clings to the underbelly of animals who've stopped trying to keep clean. Flies buzzed around its ears and belly, drawn by a scent that spoke not of life, but of abandonment. It had been left here, discarded like an old tin or a bit of broken cloth. There were no signs of a mother, no paw prints nearby, and no hint of the warmth or protection young creatures usually know, just the silence of the land and the slow, creeping heat. The puppy's sides rose and fell shallowly. It did not cry. Crying took energy. Its head lifted once, barely, as if sensing something distant, movement on the wind or the distant thrum of life, but then it dropped again, muzzle pressed to the cracked clay. Around it, the world carried on with its indifferent rhythm. Insects stirred under dry leaves. A snake slid silently from beneath a rock, and a hawk circled lazily overhead, its shadow drifting briefly across the ground like a passing thought. The puppy did not move. But fate has a strange way of colliding paths, and in that moment, just as the sun pushed fully over the hills, a team of researchers was passing nearby, moving slowly in a battered vehicle, their mission unrelated to lost dogs, monitoring drought effects on local wildlife, tracking the changes in bird nesting patterns. One of them, seated by the window, noticed the movement, just a twitch, the flick of an ear, a ripple in the dry stream bed that didn't match the patterns of grass or wind. The car slowed, then stopped. Doors creaked open. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of insects and the crunch of boots against dry soil. As they stepped closer, they saw it. The small form, curled in on itself, barely breathing. The man who found it, let's call him Ravi, had grown up with dogs. He knew immediately what he was seeing: dehydration, starvation, and heat stress. He knelt slowly so as not to startle it, though the puppy didn't startle. It had moved past fear. It was waiting for either nothing or everything. Ravi's hand hovered a moment, then gently touched its back. The puppy flinched, but then, sensing the absence of pain, stayed still. A quiet voice called for water. Another voice called for a blanket. A soft cotton wrap came first, easing under the frail body as carefully as if it were glass. Then a trickle of water on the lips, slow and tentative. The puppy didn't lick it first. It didn't remember how, but instinct, ancient and desperate, stirred. The pink tongue moved. It drank. Just a little. Enough. That moment, quiet, unspectacular, unnoticed by the wide world, was a kind of miracle. Not the kind written about in books or sung about in songs, but the quieter kind, the ones that happen far from cameras or crowds. A small life, almost extinguished, held once more by the thread of possibility. The team made space in the vehicle. The puppy, unnamed still, was placed in a makeshift cradle of towels and jackets, its tiny head resting against a bottle of warm water. The road back was long, but it didn't matter. They had done this before, though never with something so small. With each passing hour, the puppy stirred more. A soft whimper, a nudge of the nose. The first sign of resistance, when Ravi tried to check its paw and it pulled away, was met with a relieved laugh. Resistance meant life. It meant the fight wasn't over. They named her Dusty that evening, after the place where she had been found. Under the light of a flickering solar lamp, she ate a few spoonfuls of mashed food, made for infants. She slept curled in a box lined with a sweater that smelled of human skin and safety. She survived, and in the weeks that followed, she thrived. Her fur grew back in soft tufts. Her ribs disappeared beneath a layer of healthy fat. She learned to bark, quietly at first, then louder. She followed shadows. She learned to trust hands. Her story would not go viral. She would not be famous. But she would live. And for a creature so close to the end, that was everything. And so the savannah, with its long shadows and dusty winds, had watched a miracle that morning. One that began with silence, endured through neglect, and was rewritten by kindness. Somewhere the wind still moves through that dry riverbed. Somewhere flies still hum, and hawks still circle. But the little creature who once lay still among them is now far away, curled at someone's feet, dreaming her own soft dreams, no longer waiting to be saved. Mwangi stepped carefully over the pale earth, his boots pressing softly into the dry soil where the lion lay. The sun had edged higher now, spilling wider light across the sparse grass and making visible the flies that circled lazily above the lion's wounds. From this close, the damage was clear. Deep lacerations along the left flank, the kind that come from a fight not finished quickly. Dried blood had stiffened the dark and crusted fur. One eye remained half-closed, the other tracking movement without lifting the head. The chest rose slowly, with effort. Not yet gone, but slipping. Mwangi knelt a few meters away and waited. He let the minutes pass without movement, letting the lion grow used to his scent, his stillness. The lion's tail twitched once, a faint flick of tension, then settled. Mwangi noted the leg position. No full extension, paws curled unnaturally inward. Shock was setting in. That much was certain. He pulled a soft cloth from his belt, dipped it lightly into the bottle slung at his side, and inched forward. The lion's ears shifted toward the sound of water. Not fear, not yet, trust me. Just awareness. "Easy, boy," Mwangi whispered. His voice was quiet, more breath than sound. He didn't expect comprehension, only familiarity, a reminder that this figure before him had been seen, not forgotten. With a long exhale, he reached out for the cloth and gently pressed it near the lion's shoulder, away from the worst of the gashes. The lion didn't flinch. He blinked slowly, nostrils quivering, the barest flicker of muscle beneath the skin. In that stillness lay an opening. Mwangi felt it in his chest, a narrowing path between what could be done and what must not be risked. He moved his hand along the side of the rib cage, feeling for warmth, for breath. The body temperature was low. If he delayed, the lion's organs could fail before infection even took hold. But touching him more, carrying scent back into the bush, could mark him for rejection if his pride returned, if they had not already abandoned him. If he waits, the lion might die. If he acts, the lion might never be accepted again. Mwangi paused, fingers resting lightly on the matted mane. He had seen this choice before. Calves pulled from ditches only to be left behind. Injured zebras were tended gently, only to be shunned once the herd caught scent of human hands. But this lion, he was alone now and growing colder. His breath rattled once, a low, wet sound in the throat. No family waited in the shadows. No eyes watched from the hill. If help did not come soon, it would not be needed at all. A gust of wind moved across the plain. Dust curled over Mwangi's boots. Insects scattered briefly, then returned to the lion's side, hovering again above the wounds. He brushed them away with his sleeve. The lion turned his head a fraction toward the movement, and for a heartbeat their eyes met. Not fear, not even pleading. Just the weight of pain, heavy and resigned. Mwangi reached for the radio on his hip. His thumb hovered over the button. He hesitated. If he called in the team, there would be noise, movement, and a stretcher. The lion might bolt. He might not survive the fright. But alone, Mwangi had no supplies for sedation, no means to clean the wounds properly. He exhaled again, slower this time, grounding his decision in silence. He pressed the button. A soft crackle answered, followed by the static-hushed voice of a medic ranger. Mwangi's words were simple and measured. Coordinates, brief description. 1 injured lion. Critical. Approach quietly, no engines near the last rise. The lion's ears flicked again, sensing the faint sound, but he did not move. For now, he stayed, alive, waiting, and Mwangi stayed too, watching over the space between choice and consequence, between wildness and compassion, and between waiting and what comes next. Mwangi's choice to call for help was not born from hope alone, but from the precise understanding of time's quiet cruelty in the bush, where wounds fester faster than aid can arrive. And silence can mean survival or the end of it. In Tsavo, stillness has power. It carries weight. And now, as minutes edged past noon, he chose to become part of that stillness, not intruding, not leading, simply remaining. The lion's body was a study in tension and surrender. Ribcage tight, haunches slack, one eye barely open beneath the dry crust of dust. Even in his pain, he did not growl, did not bare teeth. That silence, Mwangi knew, could not be mistaken for peace. It was the silence of fatigue, of an animal at the limit of instinct, where fight has dulled and flight is no longer an option. The radio message he'd sent was brief, as all such messages are. Clarity matters more than emotion in emergencies. The lion had been alive, breathing shallow, bleeding slow, but alive. And while the words over the air had been calm, Mwangi's attention was anything but. His every breath matched the lion's, subconsciously measuring their time together, matching one fading rhythm with his own steady one. He knew from experience what could go wrong. The lion could rise in confusion, spooked by a scent or sound, and disappear into the tall grass, leaving only blood behind. He could lash out, driven by pain or fear, forcing Mwangi to move back, breaking this fragile, silent connection they had forged simply by sharing space. Or, worst of all, the lion could stop breathing altogether, surrendering before help arrived, his life ending with no one near enough to notice. The risk was constant, and the stakes did not need embellishment. If the lion moved, rescue would fail. If he stayed, hope remained. Every moment balanced on that edge. The land around them continued with its quiet life, unaware of the tension nestled between one man and one wounded animal. Wind pushed gently through the brush, stirring stalks in gentle arcs. Insects buzzed, drawn by the smell of open flesh. Mwangi continued to chase them away with light movements, never touching the lion, never closing the space that still existed between them. Distance was trust here. To overstep it would risk everything. He kept his body low, his gestures slow. He became not a figure of action, but one of presence, deliberate, patient, and waiting. That presence mattered, not because it could heal the lion, but because it could keep him from fear. And in the wild, fear was often what killed first. Twice, Mwangi glanced toward the track where help would come. A faint dust trail signaled movement now, encouraging but still distant. Each mile could bring delay, and yet he had done all he could do. The call was made. The words were sent. All that remained was to keep the lion here long enough for those words to matter. He looked once more to the lion's eyes, still open, still tracking light, a flicker of presence. Not connection, but awareness. It was enough. It meant time. The lion was not unconscious. He was choosing to stay, not with Mwangi but within reach of survival. The vet team would bring sedation, assessment, and tools to save him, but none of it mattered if he was gone when they arrived. That was the weight Mwangi carried now, not the burden of saving, but the responsibility of waiting well. The radio on his hip stayed quiet. They would not call again unless lost or delayed. No check-ins, no updates. Only the landscape between them and the lion's wounds, marked now by the thickening scent of infection and the slow sag of one hind leg. Mwangi did not need to diagnose. He had seen this before. The injuries were deep, likely from another lion. Male territorial fights rarely ended cleanly. The damage here looked defensive, slashes to the side, not the face. Perhaps he'd fled and been caught from behind. Perhaps he'd fought and lost ground. Either way, the result was the same. Gashes that would not close, flies that would not leave, and blood that still seeped slowly through coarse fur. Mwangi wiped his forehead with the edge of his sleeve, not from heat, but to keep his eyes clear. Sweat did not belong in his vision now. He needed to see the lion's breathing and needed to note each flicker of an ear and each tremble of muscle. This wasn't waiting in idleness. It was attention as action, a different kind of urgency. Around them, the reserve gave no notice. The sun pressed forward. The air thickened. Somewhere, a zebra snorted in the far grass. Nothing acknowledged the lion's condition but Mwangi's steady presence. That, too, was Tsavo. Nature moved on. Still, he stayed, because it mattered. "If he moves, we lose him," he had said earlier, barely above a whisper. It was not meant to comfort, not meant to fill the air. It was a reminder, a way of stating truth aloud, not for the lion, but for himself. Words that named the moment. And now, as the vet vehicle appeared at last along the edge of the trail, dust rising slow and wide behind it, Mwangi didn't move. He only nodded once, almost imperceptibly. The moment was not over. It was only shifting. He raised one hand to signal the team to slow, careful not to disturb the air too much. The lion's breathing continued, still uneven, still shallow, still alive. Mwangi's task, now nearly complete, was not one of heroics or rescue, but of holding ground. His presence had bought time. If it was enough, they would find out soon. If not, he had still done the only thing that could be done in the wild, to stay, quietly, and refuse to leave. The lion exhaled again, a soft rasp through dry grass. Not a sound of pain, not a sound of peace, just a breath, a signal that, for now, the line between life and death still held. Mwangi remained kneeling, eyes steady, heart quiet. He would not rise until the others arrived, until they were close enough to take over, until help, real help, replaced his quiet watch, and even then he would not speak. There was no need. The work had already been done, in stillness, in shadow, in dust, and in patience. That was what survival looked like here, not in roaring or chasing, but in waiting. "I'm not leaving." I was holding my breath beside a wounded lion until someone came. The vehicle rolled to a halt with barely a sound, tires pressing gently into the dust. From the passenger side, the wildlife vet stepped out slowly, boots crunching just once before falling silent. Mwangi remained kneeling, his body still beside the lion's. Their eyes met briefly, not for instruction, but understanding. The lion had not moved, still breathing, still present. The vet approached with measured care, equipment slung in a soft pack over one shoulder. Nothing was rushed. Even urgency had its own rhythm here. Each step was weighed against the risk of startling the lion, against losing everything they'd waited for. The vet lowered themselves quietly to the ground just behind Mwangi's right shoulder. The kit opened without sound. Gauze, antiseptic, sedation. Each tool removed with the precision of the hands of someone who had done this before and knew what was at stake if they moved too quickly. The lion's side rose and fell in shallow waves, his ribs no longer straining but dipping lower, his breath thinning. The vet's hand hovered just above his flank, waiting for the next breath before making contact. A soft touch first, gloved fingers grazing fur to test for flinch or resistance. None came. The lion's eye twitched, then stilled again. The vet nodded once to Mwangi, then drew the syringe, gently sliding the needle into the loose skin along the lion's hip. The sedative entered with no fight. Stillness held. Around them, the wind picked up slightly, rustling the acacia leaves above and sending shadows dancing across the lion's body. Minutes passed in silence. The breathing slowed. Not dangerously, but enough. Just enough. They moved, then, together. Mwangi shifted to the opposite side, allowing the vet full access to the wound. It was deeper than first seen. Torn muscle, ragged edges, dried blood already blackening along the lower ribs. Flies returned almost immediately but were brushed away with a steady hand. The vet cleaned first, warm antiseptic, slow swipes of gauze, pausing after each one to watch for change. Any sudden movement could mean the lion was waking. Any misstep could undo the fragile calm, but none came. The sedation was holding. Still, every action remained cautious. The vet's hands never rushed, never pressed too hard. Every stitch placed was an act of restraint. The lion's tail flicked once, then settled again. They worked like that for nearly 20 minutes, slowly, carefully, undoing what teeth and claws had left behind. No words passed between them, only small gestures, eye movements, and quiet confirmations. This was not the kind of care that demanded noise. It was the kind that required reverence, the kind that understood what was being asked of the body before them, to trust, even while wounded. As the vet packed the wound with a medicated salve, a low groan emerged from the lion's throat. Not a growl, not even resistance. Just breathe, carrying sound. Mwangi reached for the lion's paw, didn't touch it, only placed his hand nearby, a point of presence, steadying the space. "It's okay, boy," he whispered, voice barely above the wind. The lion did not respond, but his breathing stayed level, still alive, still with them. The final stitch was made. The vet sat back on their heels, watching closely for signs of agitation. There were none. The lion remained in that delicate state between sedation and awareness, enough to register pain, but not enough to rise, enough to stay. The salve would help prevent infection. The wound had been closed, but recovery was not assured. Survival would depend on the next hours, the next days. If the lion moved too soon, the wound could reopen. If the infection returned, there would be no second chance. But for now, the risk had been slowed, not erased, only paused. The kit was packed again, tools wiped clean and containers sealed. The vet stood slowly, back straight, joints stiff from kneeling. Mwangi remained beside the lion, eyes scanning the horizon, no threats. No sound beyond the rustle of wind and the quiet breath of an injured animal held by time. They would leave soon. Let the lion rest. Let the drugs wear off gently. He would wake in his own time, and he would decide what came next. But the wound, once gaping, was now clean, closed, and the lion, for now, remained still beneath the wide, patient sky. In the stillness that followed intervention, the hours no longer held their shape. Time loosened its grip as the weight of effort gave way to quiet waiting. The vet's vehicle had long vanished over the horizon, its tracks already softened by wind, and Mwangi stood alone, no longer in the posture of urgency, but of reverence, his presence now one of quiet witness rather than action. The lion, lying in the low grass that swayed with every breath of the land, remained a figure suspended between fragility and force, between stillness and the will to move again. His body, marked by pain and effort, bore the aftermath of trauma. Stitched skin stretched taut over ribs that had been torn by another's strength, now held closed by a human's hand. The sedative that had once protected him from panic had begun its gentle retreat, and with it came the first subtle signals that the body, though burdened, had not yet surrendered. An ear flicking at an invisible irritant, a twitch in the thick muscle along his thigh. The shallow rhythm of breath pressing against the healing edge of his side. There was no certainty in what would follow. A lion does not rise from such injury because he must. He rises, if he can, when the body allows it, when the pain and confusion find a rhythm that permits motion, when the wound is no longer the dominant voice but only one among many. Mwangi did not intervene. He did not coax or call or urge. He only stepped back quietly, creating space where the lion might find his footing without the pressure of being watched too closely. The sun angled low in the western sky, filtering through pale clouds and laying soft golden lines across the land. The lion's mane caught the light, ragged and dust-streaked, and though his eyes opened slowly, their clarity was not immediate. They drifted unfocused, tracking motionless air, as if still caught between sleep and pain. But movement followed. Not sudden, not sure, only a front paw reaching forward, claws dragging faint trails in the dirt, a body unsure of itself but seeking center. Minutes passed between each gesture. The lion's haunch lifted just slightly, quivering with effort before falling again. Then breathe. Then stillness. Then a second attempt. A quiet groan, low in the belly, the kind made not of voice but of the strain of muscle remembering what it once knew. The front legs engaged first, pressing shakily against the ground. The lift was uneven, weighted toward his right, and for a moment he paused mid-rise, his frame suspended on trembling limbs. A final push, and his back legs joined the motion, unfolding beneath him. He stood, not proudly, not with the clean grace he once carried, but with the raw force of survival. Each step after that was a test. His body leaned heavily to the left, favoring the ribs that had been stitched closed, each breath catching in his chest. One paw dragged slightly behind the others, and when it landed, the imprint was deeper than it should have been, a sign of imbalance, not failure. Mwangi, from his quiet distance, did not speak. His presence remained steady, offering no cues but calmness. The lion took another step, then one more. Every movement stretched the fragile bond of healing. Any misstep could mean the wound would open, the infection would return, and the pain would win. But he did not falter. He moved forward, and though his body had forgotten symmetry, it remembered motion. Even wounded, it knew how to go on. The land around him responded with its own soft alerts. Guinea fowl burst into noisy flight nearby, their wings flaring briefly in the quiet dusk. The lion paused, head rising slightly. He did not startle or crouch. He only listened. That he could respond to the world again was itself a sign of return. He was not beyond pain, not even beyond danger, but he was aware, alert, and alive. Mwangi watched without a word. This was the turning point he had waited for, the moment after care, after touch, after stitching and sedation, when the lion either resumed his own path or fell beneath it. There would be no second attempt if this one failed. But the lion chose forward, even if forward was slow, crooked, and burdened. He did not look back. Lions do not need to. His path bent slightly toward a line of brush, then disappeared into it, his mane blending with the last shadows of the evening. Mwangi did not follow. This was not a story for completion. It was one of interruption and possibility. The lion had stood. He had walked. He had not collapsed. That was the measure of hope in wild places. Not the absence of injury, but the presence of motion after pain. And so Mwangi stood a while longer, watching the place where paw prints cut shallow lines in dust that had known only wind for days. He said nothing, asked nothing, and promised nothing. Then, when the light began to change, he turned back toward the direction he'd come, his figure swallowed gradually by the same tall grass that had hidden the lion's breath. Behind him, the landscape resumed its breathless rhythm. The air moved gently across the plains, rustling seed heads and stirring old leaves. Above, the sky held on to its soft hues just a little longer before evening settled. No other sounds followed, just the hush of dust, the press of wind, and, far beyond human sight, a lion stepping quietly through the edge of his pain into the uncertain peace of recovery. The quiet that held the field in the early light was not the quiet of absence, but of gentle presence, a stillness earned by the long night, by survival, by breath that did not falter. Thin bands of dawn stretched across the sky, casting the land in tones of silver and dust. In this softened hour, before the sun claimed the horizon fully, the lion lay folded into the earth, not in defeat, but in conscious repose. His body, marked by pain, bore no signs of collapse. Instead, it curved inward protectively, careful of the stitched wound along his ribs. There was exhaustion, yes, and the heaviness of having used what strength remained to stand and walk. But his breath was slow and smooth, no longer shallow or strained. That quiet rhythm of inhalation and release signaled something subtle. Something more fragile than a heartbeat or pulse. It hinted at the fragile return of safety, not just within the body but between species, between wild and human, between a lion's fear and a ranger's patience. There was always risk in that space. Trust, if it dared to form, lived only in the seconds it was upheld. Not a bond, not a contract, but a breath-by-breath permission. Mwangi knew this. When he returned, he did so with the same deliberate restraint that had governed every movement the day before. His boots moved through brittle grass without sound, his figure bent slightly as if the air itself might shatter if disturbed too harshly. Nothing about him announced control. There were no weapons, no tools beyond a small bag at his side, and even that he carried loosely. As he neared the lion, he slowed, gauging not just distance but the unspoken tension of proximity. He waited for the flick of a tail, the shift of a paw, the slight coil of readiness that signaled unease, but none came. The lion remained still, head low, eyes drowsy but open, watching, and it was that watching, not wide-eyed or fearful, but calm and receptive, that gave Mwangi his answer. A few feet away, he crouched into the grass, grounding himself at the lion's level, offering not dominance, but presence. Then, slowly, with fingers that had dressed the wound just hours before, he reached into his satchel and drew out fresh gauze, the faint scent of antiseptic tracing the breeze between them. The lion did not flinch. There was no recoil, no growl. It was not submission, it never could be, but it was something else. It was the absence of rejection. That, in the wild, was a gift not lightly given. With reverent stillness, Mwangi extended his hand, not to touch, not yet, but simply to offer space. His open palm rested near the lion's front paw, close enough for the breath between them to bridge the gap, and then, impossibly softly, the lion shifted. No grand gesture, no cinematic movement, just the slightest lean forward, and the rough bristle of mane brushes against human knuckles. A dry nose met Mwangi's palm for the briefest of moments, then withdrew. No sound followed, no escalation. The contact ended as gently as it had begun. But in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition that neither could name. Born not of language but of proximity held without fear. It was not gratitude. Lions do not express thanks. It was not affection. The wild does not nurture bonds with strangers. What passed was simply this. The lion allowed him, and in that allowance something rare unfolded. Mwangi did not reach again. He did not try to keep what had been offered. He only breathed and softly murmured words that carried no demand. "You're safe now." Whether the lion understood the meaning mattered little. What mattered was the tone, the calm, steady current that kept fear at bay. Trust, if it ever existed, never came as a steady flame. It flickered, sparked briefly, and vanished the moment it was mishandled. This lion, wounded and exhausted, had made a decision not to flee, not to defend. But that decision could vanish with a single wrong move. So Mwangi made none. A light breeze stirred the field, carrying scents of dust and distant acacia, and the lion's ears turned slightly in response. His body remained still but alert, his gaze lingering on the man crouched nearby before drifting outward again. The moment of touch had passed, but its residue held. It marked a shift, not in status, but in memory. An imprint, perhaps, of what it felt like not to be pursued, not to be feared. Mwangi rose slowly, backing away in quiet increments. He did not need to remain close. The intervention was over. The lion would need time, not interference. There were no more medicines to apply, no more sedatives to time. What remained was the long, unhurried journey of healing and the choice to accept care or retreat from it. He would be watched from afar, yes, but not followed, not pressured. The sun was climbing now, its warmth spilling across the lion's body, catching in the amber strands of his mane, illuminating the ridge of his spine where muscles still trembled faintly beneath the surface. His head lowered to folded paws, not in defeat, but in rest. He did not sleep, but nor did he guard himself. That he could lie in open space, unhidden, unguarded, was a sign more telling than any gesture. It spoke of a nervous system easing back into balance, of an animal learning, minute by minute, that he had not been hunted here. Mwangi turned then, leaving the lion in peace. His shadow stretched long across the savannah, one more fleeting imprint soon erased by time and wind. Behind him, no sound rose but the soft hush of grass bending under morning air. And the lion remained, breathing steadily, gaze open as the day began. By late morning, the heat began to rise. Not sharply, but enough that the pale air took on a shimmer, bending the horizon into soft, wavering lines. The lion had not moved since dawn, save for the flick of an ear or the twitch of a paw against the flies. His body still held the heaviness of injury, but there was no sign of worsening. The stitched side remained intact, clean beneath the slow breath of his flank. Mwangi and the team had agreed early to keep distance, not to crowd the animal with unnecessary activity. Instead, they worked quietly along the edge of the tree line, assembling what shade they could manage. A tarpaulin stretched low between poles, its fabric blending into the landscape, and beneath it, a shallow container of clean water drawn from a nearby borehole. The effort was not to tame or coax, only to offer tools for survival in a land where even the healthy struggled against sun and thirst. The water was placed a short distance from where the lion lay, far enough not to provoke alarm, but near enough that it might be found without effort. They left it there and retreated, the space between presence and absence carefully measured. For a long while, nothing happened. The lion remained still, eyes half closed, muscles at rest. Then, just before midday, a shift. It was almost imperceptible. First the lift of a shoulder, then a slow roll onto his stomach, his weight braced carefully on his good side. The movement was cautious and calculated. He paused often, testing for pain, testing for strength. But he did not lie back down. Instead, with deliberate slowness, he extended his forelegs and began to pull himself forward, belly low to the earth. There was no urgency, only purpose. Every motion was quiet, unhurried, and shaped by instinct to conserve what little strength remained. Dust clung to his mane as he moved, his breathing steady but audible, chest rising against the pressure of effort. And then he reached the water. For a moment he hovered, nose over the surface, breath rippling the pool. The team, watching from a distance through field lenses, did not speak. None moved. And then he drank. The sound was faint, the rhythmic lapping of tongue against still water. It was the first voluntary action he had taken since the operation, a choice, not driven by pain or confusion, but by need, and the decision to answer that need. The water darkened slightly as dust fell from his muzzle, but he continued, pausing only to breathe, then drinking again. In the wild, where weakness is invitation, the act of rising, of moving openly, of lowering one's head to drink, is a risk. And yet he did. Not as an animal seeking aid, but as one reclaiming agency. The distance from predator to patient was never linear. It curved through exhaustion, through silence, through the unbearable work of recovery. When he finished, he stepped back, just 2 strides, and lay again closer now to the shelter, his body no longer exposed in full sun. His sides rose and fell slowly. There was no sound but the soft push of wind against dry grass and the creak of canvas shifting above him. Mwangi, still crouched beneath an acacia nearby, allowed himself one exhale. No more. He knew the road ahead remained uncertain. Infection, re-injury, and the return of fear all lingered as possibilities. But the lion had chosen water, chosen to rise, chosen, even briefly, to accept what was offered. In this place, where each day demands strength, where rest is a gamble, and vulnerability often means death, that single act of drinking became more than survival. It became permission. And for now, in the hush between wind gusts, it was enough. By the time the first edge of light broke across the horizon, the field had fallen into stillness again. No wind moved through the grass, and even the birds waited in quiet, their calls held in the hush before sunrise. The lion had been awake long before the sky softened, resting in the half-dark, his breaths deep and even, his body no longer braced with the tension of pain. The swelling around his ribs had eased, the wound sealed neatly beneath days of care and silence. But more telling than flesh was posture, the quiet readiness in his limbs, the way his paws pressed lightly into the earth, not with fear, but with a purpose that had not been seen since the morning he was found. For hours he had watched the distance, eyes scanning beyond the tarp's edge, beyond the quiet forms of the rangers who had slept in shifts nearby, always alert, always just far enough to give space. Now, as dawn crept in, he shifted. First, the subtle lift of his head, then the careful press of forelegs against dry soil. His back legs followed more slowly, uncertain under him for a moment. But he stood, not tall, not strong, not yet, one side still favoring the strain of healing, but upright. His silhouette against the pale sky was lean, marked with the long story of recent days. Mwangi and the others did not move. No gestures, no farewell. Just stillness and breath, a quiet acknowledgement of what this moment meant. The lion took one step, then another, his gait uneven but determined. He moved through the shaded space where he had once collapsed, where water had been placed without demand, and where voices had remained low and hands careful. He passed beyond the trees without pausing, his body brushing against the dry brush, stirring dust but not fear. Each step marked a choice, to continue, to carry his weight alone again, to enter the terrain that did not offer safety, only the freedom to disappear. This was no release. There was no cage to open, no leash to unclip. It was simply time. In his slow movement, in the quiet that followed, there was no triumph. There was only a shift, a return. He had come from this land. It was his, though he had nearly lost it. In the wild, territory is not owned through pride, but held through survival. And now, with fragile strength, he had what was his. He paused once, at the edge where the tall grass began, lifting his head into the wind. Sensing not the men behind him, but the scent lines drawn across a world that waited without judgment. Then, without looking back, he stepped forward and vanished into the brush. Not fast, not bold, but gone. Wangi exhaled quietly. No words were spoken. What had been risk, of death, of infection, of rejection, had become possibility. But nothing was guaranteed. The lion would still face hunger, injury, and rivals. He might fall again, just beyond reach. But for now, he had chosen solitude over safety. And that, in the wild, was its own kind of healing. Behind him, the grass settled. A breeze rose with the sun, light moving through branches overhead, carrying the sound of distant hoofbeats far beyond sight. No footprints were left behind. Only the empty tarp, the faint scent of antiseptic, and a field once held between survival and trust, now returned to quiet. Picture Pete romped. A drought-stricken African savanna at dawn. Golden light stretching across cracked clay earth and dry, yellowed grasses. In the foreground, a malnourished, mud-smeared puppy lies curled in a narrow, hardened riverbed, ribs showing, flies circling, unmoving except for faint breath. A male researcher, kneeling nearby in dusty boots and field gear, gently reaches out with one hand holding a soft cloth and water bottle, eyes filled with concern. Behind him, further up the slope beneath thorny acacia trees, a wounded adult lion lies stretched on its side, stitched wounds along its flank, breathing shallowly, watched silently by a ranger sitting low in the grass. A faint tarp shelter and water bowl sit off to one side, blending into the land. Overhead, a hawk glides slowly, its shadow cutting across the terrain. The entire scene radiates quiet tension and care, a frozen moment of survival, silence, and fragile trust between human and animal, drenched in morning light, dust haze, and stillness.